Volume 3, Chapter 9 of The Widow Barnaby by Frances Milton Trollope. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9 brings us back, as it ought, to Mrs. Barnaby. It may be thought, perhaps, that the vexed, and as she thought herself, the persecuted Mrs. Barnaby, had sufficiently tried what a prison was to prevent her ever desiring to find herself within the walls of such an edifice again. But such an opinion, however likely to be right, was nevertheless wrong; for no sooner had the widow recovered from the fit of rage into which the triumphant exit of Miss Compton had thrown her, and settled herself on her solitary sofa, with no better comforter or companion than a cup of tea modified with sky blue milk, than the following soliloquy, though she gave it not breath, passed through her brain. "So here I am, then, after 6 months' trial of the travelling system, and a multitude of experiments in fashionable society, just £700 poorer than when I set out, and without having advanced a single inch towards a second marriage. This will never do. My youth, my beauty, and my fortune will all melt away together before the object is obtained, unless I change my plans and find some better mode of proceeding." Here Mrs. Barnaby sipped her vile tea, opened her work-box that she had been constrained to leave so hastily, ascertained that the exquisite collar she was working had received no injury during her absence, and then resumed her meditations. "Heigh ho! It is most horribly dull, sitting in this way all by oneself. Even that good-for-nothing, stupid, ungrateful Agnes was better to look at than nothing. And even in that horrid Fleet there was some pleasure in knowing that there was an elegant, interesting man to be met in a passage now and then, whose eyes spoke plainly enough what he thought of me. Poor fellow! His being in misfortune ought not to produce ill will to him in a generous mind. How he looked as he said, 'Adieu, then, madam. With you vanishes the last ray of light that will ever reach my heart.' And I am sure he said exactly what he felt, and no more. Poor O'Donagough! My heart aches for him." And here she fell into a very piteous and sentimental mood, indeed. Had her soliloquy been spoken out loud, as words could utter it, nobody would have heard a syllable about love, marriage, or any such nonsense. Her heart was at this time altogether given up to pity, compassion, and a deep sense of the duties of a Christian; and before she went to bed she had reasoned herself very satisfactorily into the conviction that, as a tender-hearted woman and a believer, it was her bounden duty, now that she had got out of trouble herself, to return to the Fleet for the purpose of once more seeing Mr. O'Donagough, and inquiring whether it was in her power to do anything to serve him before she left London. Nothing more surely tends to soothe the spirits and calm the agitated nerves than an amiable and pious resolution, taken as this was done, during the last waning hours of the day, and just before the languid body lays itself down to rest. Mrs. Barnaby slept like a top after coming to the determination that, let the turnkeys think what they would of it, she would call at the Fleet Prison, and ask to see Mr. O'Donagough the next morning. The following morning came, and found the benevolent widow steadfast in her purpose. And yet, to her honour be it spoken, it was not without some struggles with a feeling which many might have called shame, but which she conscientiously condemned as pride, that she set forth at length upon her adventurous expedition. "Nothing, I am sure," it was thus she reasoned with herself, "nothing in the world could induce me to take such a step, but a feeling that it was my duty. Heaven knows I have had many follies in my day, I don't deny it. I am no hardened sinner, and that blessed book that he lent me has not been a pearl thrown to swine. The Sinner's Reward. What a comforting title! I don't hope ever to be the saint that the pious author describes, but I'm sure I shall be a better woman all my life for reading it. And the visiting this poor O'Donagough is the first act by which I can prove the good it has done me." Then came some doubts and difficulties respecting the style of toilette which she ought to adopt on so peculiar an occasion. It won't do for a person looking like a woman of fashion to drive up to the Fleet Prison, and ask to see such a man as O'Donagough. He is too young and handsome to make it respectable. But after all, what does it signify what people say? And as for my bonnet, I'll just put my Brussels lace veil on my black and pink. That will hide my ringlets, and make me look more matronly. In her deep lace veil, then, and with a large silk cloak which concealed the becoming gaiety of her morning dress, Mrs. Barnaby presented herself before the gate she had so lately passed, and in a very demure voice said to the keeper of it, "I wish to be permitted to see Mr. O'Donagough." The fellow looked at her and smiled. Well, madam," he replied, "I believe there will be no difficulty about that. Walk on, if you please. You'll find them as can send you forward." A few more barriers passed, and a few more well amused turnkeys propitiated, and Mrs. Barnaby stood before a door which she knew as well as any of them opened upon the solitary abode of the broken hearted but elegant Mr. O'Donagough. The door was thrown open for her to enter ; but she paused, desiring her usher to deliver her card first, with an intimation that she wished to speak to the gentleman on business. She was not kept long in suspense, for the voice of the solitary inmate was heard from within, saying in soft and melancholy accents, " It is very heavenly kindness. Beg her to walk in." And in she walked, the room door being immediately closed behind her. Mr. O'Donagough was a very handsome man of about 30 years of age, with a physiognomy and cerebral development which might have puzzled Dr. Combe himself; for impressions left by the past were so evidently fading away before the active operation of the present, that to say distinctly from the examining eye, or the examining finger, what manner of man he was, would have been exceedingly difficult. But the powers of the historian and biographer are less limited, and their record shall be given. Mr. Patrick O'Donagough was but a half breed, and that a mongrel half, of the noble species which his names announce. He was the natural son of an Englishman of wealth and consequence by a poor Irish girl called Nora O'Donagough ; and though his father did what was considered by many as very much for him, he never permitted him to assume his name. The young O'Donagough was placed as a clerk to one of the police magistrates of the metropolis, and showed great ability in the readiness with which he soon executed the business that passed through his hands. He not only learned to know by sight every rogue and roguess that appeared at the office, but showed a very uncommon degree of sagacity as to their innocence or guilt upon every new occasion that enforced their appearance there. His noble father never entirely lost sight of him, and finding his abilities so remarkable, he was induced again to use his interest in those quarters where influence abides, and to get him promoted to a lucrative situation in a custom house on the coast, where he made money rapidly, while his handsome person and good address gave him access to the society of many people greatly his superiors in station, who most of them were frequenting a fashionable watering place at no great distance from the station where he was employed. This lasted for a few years, much to the satisfaction of his illustrious parent ; and it might have continued till an easy fortune was assured to him, had he not unluckily formed too great an intimacy with one or two vastly gentlemanlike but decidedly sporting characters. From this point his star began to descend, till, step by step, he had lost his money, his appointment, his father's favour, and his own freedom. Having lain in prison for debt during some weeks, he found means again to touch the heart of his father so effectually, as to induce him to pay his debts and restore him to freedom, upon condition, however, of his immediately setting off for Australia with £500 in his pocket, and with the understanding that he was never more to return. The promise was given, and the £500 received ; but the young man was not proof against temptation. He met some old acquaintance, lost half his money at ecarte, and permitted the vessel in which he was to sail to depart without him. This was a moment of low spirits and great discouragement ; but he felt, nevertheless, that a steadfast heart and bold spirit might bring a man out of as bad a scrape even as that into which he had fallen. Some people told him to apply again to his father, but he thought he had better not, and he applied to a gentleman with whom he had made acquaintance in prison instead. This person had, like himself, been reduced to great distress by the turf; but having fortunately found means of satisfying the creditor at whose suit he was detained, he was now doing exceedingly well as preacher to an independent congregation of ranting fanatics. He bestowed on his old associate some excellent advice as to his future principles and conduct, giving him to understand that the turf, even to those who were the most fortunate, never answered so well as the line of business he now followed, and assured him, moreover, that if he would forthwith commence an assiduous study of the principles and practice of the profession, he would himself lend him a helping hand to turn it to account. O'Donagough loved change, novelty, and excitement, and again manifested great talent in the facility with which he mastered the mysteries of this new business. He was soon seen rapidly advancing towards lasting wealth and independence. One of the wealthiest merchants in London had offered him the place of domestic prayer and preacher at his beautiful residence at Castaway Saved Park, when an almost forgotten creditor, who had lost sight of him for many years, unluckily recognised him as he was delivering a most awakening evening lecture in a large ware room converted into a chapel near Moor Fields. Eager to take advantage of this unexpected piece of good fortune, the tailor, for such was his profession, arrested the inspired orator in the first place, and then asked him if he were able to settle his account in the next. Had the manner of transacting the business been reversed, it is probable that the affair would have been settled without any arrest at all ; for Sir Miles Morris, of Castaway Saved Park, was one of the most pious individuals of the age, and would hardly have permitted his chaplain elect in every sense, to have gone to prison for £37, 9 shillings, and 8 pence. But being in prison, O'Donagough was shy of mentioning the circumstance to his distinguished patron, and was employed, at the time Mrs. Barnaby first made acquaintance with him, in composing discourses on the preternatural powers over the human mind, accorded to the chosen vessels called upon to pour out the doctrine of the new birth to the people. There is little doubt that these really eloquent compositions would have sold rapidly, and perfectly have answered the object of their clever author. But accident prevented the trial from being made, for before the projected volume was more than half finished, success of another kind overtook Mr. O'Donagough. Mrs. Barnaby, on entering, found the poor prisoner she had so charitably come to visit seated at a writing desk, with many sheets of closely written manuscript about it. He rose as she entered, and approached her with a judicious mixture of respectful deference and ardent gratitude. " May Heaven reward you, madam, for this blessed proof of Christian feeling! How can I suitably speak my gratitude? I do assure you, Mr. O'Donagough, that you are quite right in thinking that I come wholly and solely from a Christian spirit, and a wish to do my duty," said Mrs. Barnaby. Mr. O'Donagough looked extremely handsome as he answered with a melancholy smile, " Alas, madam, what other motive could the whole world offer, excepting obedience to the will of Heaven, sufficiently strong to bring such a person as I now look upon voluntarily within these fearful walls?" " That is very true indeed. There is nothing else that could make one do it. Heaven knows I suffered too much when I was here myself to feel any inclination for returning. But I thought, Mr. O'Donagough, that it would be very unfeeling in me, who witnessed your distress, to turn my back upon you when my own troubles are past and over. And so I am come, Mr. O'Donagough, to ask if I can be of any use to you in any way before I set off upon my travels ; for I intend to make a tour to France, and perhaps to Rome." The widow looked at Mr. O'Donagough's eyes to see how he took the news ; for somehow or other she could not help fancying that the poor young man would feel more forlorn and miserable still, when he heard that not only the walls of the Fleet Prison, but the English Channel, was to divide them ; nor did the expression of the eyes she thus examined lessen this idea. A settled, gentle melancholy seemed to rise from his heart, and peep out upon her through these " windows of the soul." To France, to Rome! A deep sigh followed, and for a minute or two the young man remained with his eyes mournfully fixed on her face. He then rose up, and stepping across the narrow space occupied by the table that stood between them, he took her hand, and in a deep, sweet voice, that almost seemed breaking into a sob, he said, " May you be happy whithersoever you go. My prayers shall follow you. My ardent prayers shall be unceasingly breathed to Heaven for your safety, and my blessing, my fervent, tender blessing, shall hover round you as you go." Mrs. Barnaby was exceedingly affected. " Don't speak so, pray don't speak so, Mr. O'Donagough," she said in a voice which gave her very good reason to believe that tears were coming. " I am sure I would pray for you too, when I am far away, if it would do you any good," and here one of her worked pocket handkerchiefs was really drawn out and applied to her eyes. " If, Mrs. Barnaby," exclaimed the young man fervently, " if — oh ! do not doubt it — do not for a moment doubt that I should feel the influence of it in every nerve — let me teach you to understand me, Mrs. Barnaby, for I have made an examination into the effects of spiritual sympathies the subject of much study. Lay your hand upon my heart — nay, let it rest there for a moment, and you will be able to comprehend what I would explain to you. Does not that poor heart beat and throb, Mrs. Barnaby? And think you that it would have fluttered thus, had you not said that you would pray for me? Then can you doubt that if, indeed, you should still remember the unhappy O'Donagough as you pursue your jocund course, o'er hill and vale — if, indeed, you should breathe a prayer to Heaven for his welfare, can you doubt that it will fall upon him like the soft fanning of a seraph's wing, and heal the tumult of his soul, e'en in this dungeon There was so much apparent sincerity, as well as tenderness, in what the young man uttered, that a feeling of conviction at once found its way to the understanding of Mrs. Barnaby ; and little doubt, if any, remained on her mind as to the efficacy of her prayers. " Indeed, Mr. O'Donagough, I will pray for you then ; and I'm sure I should be a very wicked wretch if I did not. But is there nothing else I could do to comfort you ?" Mr. O'Donagough had often found his handsome and expressive countenance of great service to him, and so he did now. No answer he could have given in words to this kind question could have produced so great effect as the look with which he received it. Mrs. Barnaby was fluttered, agitated, and did not quite know what to do or say next ; but Mr. O'Donagough did. He rose from his chair, and raising his arms above his head to their utmost length, he passionately clasped his hands, and stood thus, his fine eyes communing with the ceiling, just long enough to give the widow time to be aware that he certainly was the very handsomest young man in the world ; and then he drew his chair close beside her, took her hand, and fixed those fine eyes very particularly upon hers. " Comfort me !" he murmured in a soft whisper, which had it not been breathed very close to her ear, would probably have been lost. " Comfort me ? You ask if you could comfort me ? Oh, earth, oh, heaven, bear witness, as I swear, that to trace one single movement of pity on that lovely face, would go farther towards healing every sorrow of my soul, than all the wealth that Plutus could pour on me, though it should come in ingots of gold, heavy enough to break the chains that hold me." " Oh, Mr. O'Donagough !" was all Mrs. Barnaby could utter ; but she turned her face away, nor was the fascinating prisoner again indulged with a full view of it, though he endeavoured to make his eyes follow the way hers led, till he dropped down on his knees before her, and by taking possession of both her hands, enabled himself to pursue his interesting speculations upon its expression, in spite of all she could do to prevent it. This brought the business for which Mrs. Barnaby came ; namely, the inquiry into what she could do to be serviceable to Mr. O'Donagough before she left London, to a very speedy termination ; for with this fair index of what he might say before his eyes, the enterprising prisoner ventured to hint, that nothing would so effectually soothe his sorrows as the love of the charming being who had already expressed such melting pity for him. He moreover made it manifest that if she would, with the noble confidence which he was sure made a part of her admirable character, lend him wherewithal to liquidate the paltry debt for which he had been so treacherously arrested, he could find means again to interest his noble father in his behalf, and by giving him such a guarantee for his future steadiness as an honourable attachment was always sure to offer, he should easily induce him to renew his intention of fitting him out handsomely for an expedition to Australia, to which, as he confessed, he was more strongly inclined than even to persevere in listening to the call he had received to the ministry. Notwithstanding the tender agitation into which such a conversation must inevitably throw every lady who would listen to it, Mrs. Barnaby did not so completely lose her presence of mind, as not to remember that it would be better to look about her a little before she positively promised to marry and accompany to Australia the captivating young man who knelt at her feet. But this praiseworthy degree of caution did not prevent her from immediately deciding upon granting him the loan he desired ; nay, with thoughtful kindness, she herself suggested that it might be more convenient to make the sum lent £40, instead of £37 9s. 8d., and having said this with a look and manner the most touching, she at length induced Mr. O'Donagough to rise ; and after a few such expressions of tender gratitude as the occasion called for, they parted, the widow promising to deliver to him with her own fair hands on the morrow the sum necessary for his release ; while he, as he fervently kissed her hand, declared, that deeply as he felt this generous kindness, he should wish it had never been extended to him, unless the freedom thus regained were rendered dear to his soul by her sharing it with him. " Give me time, dear O'Donagough, give me time to think of this startling proposal ; and to morrow we will meet again," were the words in which she replied to him ; and then, permitting herself for one moment to return the tender glances he threw after her, she opened the room door and passed through it, too much engrossed by her own thoughts, hopes, wishes, and speculations, to heed the variety of amusing grimaces by which the various turnkeys hailed her regress through them. It would be unreasonable for any one to desire better sympathy than that which existed between my heroine and Mr. O'Donagough, when they thus tore themselves asunder. he remaining in durance vile till such time as fate or love should release him, and she to throw herself into a hackney coach, there to meditate on the pleasures and the pains either promised or threatened by the proposal she had just received. The sympathy lay in this, that both parties were determined to inform themselves very particularly of the worldly condition of the other, before they advanced one step farther towards matrimony, for which state, though the gentleman had spoken with rapture, and the lady had listened with softness, both had too proper a respect to think of entering upon it unadvisedly. CHAPTER X.